Hello and welcome to Mentora IAS and I warmly welcome you all to the new session of current SAAR. इस सेशन में we are going to discuss the concepts of the month of January 2025 with respect to the subject internal security. So internal security not in terms of the mains examination. What I'm trying to tell you is that we are going to discuss some defense technology. ठीक है, जो डिफेंस टेक्नोलॉजी इंडिया में यूज हुई है जनवरी में, जिस चीज के बारे में हमारे को न्यूज़पेपर में था, एंड देन सब्सिक्वेंटली डिफेंस एक्सरसाइजेस, वो हम यहाँ पे कवर कर रहे हैं इन द इंडियन इंटरनल सिक्योरिटी. सो विल बी कवरिंग दीज टू थिंग्स हियर, the defense technology and defense exercises. So do not confuse this with respect to the utilization of you can say the other things like internal security related left wing extremism or things like those. So आज we are going to discuss this particular thing. So I really hope that you have subscribed to our channel and at the same time you are also very diligently watching your videos. They have been deliberately kept at a frequency of 3 days a week so that you can comfortably watch them. छोटे छोटे वीडियोस हैं एंड एट द सेम टाइम दे आर देयर टू बूस्ट योर कॉन्फिडेंस. ठीक है, यू विल बी गेटिंग एन एक्सपर्ट गाइडेंस फ्रॉम 3 डिफरेंट करंट अफेयर्स एक्सपर्ट्स हैविंग देयर ओन फील्ड्स. माइन बीइंग इंडियन पॉलिटी, इंटरनल सिक्योरिटी, इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस एंड ज्योग्राफी, साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी. ये पोर्शंस मैं लूंगा, तो उसके आपको सारे के सारे जो वीडियोस हैं वो मेरी तरफ से आएंगे. यू हैव the other 2 faculties as Sonali ma'am, she'll take up history and Indian society, and subsequently then you have Jay Prakash sir, he will be taking up environment and economy. ठीक है, so all your subjects are covered, all your current affairs is covered, and we also integrate the GS portion with respect to the current affairs as far as they are relevant. ठीक है, कोई नॉइज वाला चक्कर हमारे साथ नहीं है कि हम नॉइज लेके आएंगे कोई एंड दैट इज बेसिकली हाउ यू आर गोइंग टू हैव ओवरवेलमिंग इन्फॉर्मेशन. ना, दैट सिंपली नॉट अस. ठीक है, so that is why if you have not yet subscribed to our channels, please, these are our social media handles, please do subscribe to whatever social media handles you are at, especially the Telegram channel, because all the notes, handouts and value added material, whatever is there with respect to our own initiative and all other UPSC centric things that are going to be available here. Apart from that, a lot more activities will be happening in the Instagram channel and the Facebook channel, but I would definitely want you to join this particular channel and be connected with us. ठीक है, and as always, ये वीडियो पसंद आए please do like, share, subscribe, and at the same time do comment your doubts. I really take them seriously. None of the doubts are stupid for me. Get your doubts here which are related to UPSC civil services prelims examination with the concepts that I take, and for that matter the other teachers who take their areas, so that we can help you augment your preparation and at the same time broaden your understanding about things. ठीक है, so today what we are going to discuss for the very first thing is basically a long range hypersonic missile. ठीक है, long range hypersonic missile has recently been tested by the Defense Research and Development Organization, DRDO, and this particular missile has been tested from the integrated test range of the DRDO located in the Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Island. Okay, so there is something called the integrated testing range, and this particular you can say facility or this particular establishment is located in the state of Odisha. Okay, the name of the island is Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Island. Okay, this was formerly known as the Wheeler Island. ठीक है, 2015 से this particular island has been named Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam Island. Okay, इससे पहले it was named as Wheeler Island. So from this particular you can say testing range, we have tested for the very first time a long range hypersonic missile. Now this particular missile has the ability to strike a target which is located at a distance of 1500 kilometers. ठीक है, ये इतनी बड़ी रेंज के मिसाइल्स को या इतने दूर रहने वाले टारगेट्स को हिट कर सकता है. इट कैन हिट इट विद एक्यूरेसी टू अ टारगेट विच इज 1500 किलोमीटर्स अवे फ्रॉम द सोर्स. ठीक है, एंड दिस पर्टिकुलर मिसाइल हैज द कैपेबिलिटी ऑफ कैरिंग डिफरेंट काइंड्स ऑफ पेलोड्स. ओके, सो पेलोड इज द डिलीवरी, द फाइनल डिलीवरी ऑफ वॉट एवर यू वॉन्ट टू सेंड. ठीक है, सो विथ रिस्पेक्ट टू मिसाइल्स द पेलोड्स आर बेसिकली दोज एक्सप्लोसिव्स और दोज डेटोनेशंस दैट यू वुड वांट टू send to the adversarial side so that it impinges maximum damage to them. ठीक है, तो ये अलग अलग पेलोड्स को एक साथ या अलग अलग पेलोड्स के लिए कॉन्फ़िगर किया जा सकता है. तो व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट पेलोड्स वी विल बी टॉकिंग अबाउट टू ऑफ देम. वन इज कॉल्ड कन्वेंशनल पेलोड्स and the other one will be called as nuclear payload. So this is basically a nuclear capable hypersonic missile. Now what is special about this particular missile? देखो, India basically has been the fourth country. Okay, India is the fourth country to achieve this hypersonic missile or to develop hypersonic missile. Okay, but the point being that there is also a very important event related to this. Okay, and that is India is the first country. India is the first country to test a long range hypersonic missile. तो एक लॉन्ग रेंज हाइपरसोनिक मिसाइल को टेस्ट करने वाली पहली कंट्री इज बेसिकली इंडिया. ओके, द अदर मिसाइल्स दैट आर करेंटली अंडर डिप्लॉयमेंट दे हैव अ रेंज ऑफ अबाउट 750 kilometers and the range of this particular missile is basically 1500 kilometers. So India is basically the first country to do such a test, although we are the fourth country to develop this technology indigenously. ठीक है, so that is basically the importance of this particular test. Now when you are reading any missile system or any missile, so what exactly should be read with respect to the UPSC civil services examination? So the first thing that you should be reading about is what exactly is a missile. Okay, then with respect to the missile, what are the various terminologies that are associated with it? Okay, that is the second thing. Just like I have been telling you again and again, long range, that the range of this particular missile. So what is the range? Okay, then at the same time, what are the various types of missiles that we have? Okay, how do we classify the various kinds of missiles? Then we have that how does a missile get classified with respect to the speed? So just like this particular article opened up with the heading of hypersonic missile. So are there any other kinds of missiles? And if they are, how they are classified with respect to speed? Then what exactly are hypersonic missiles? Okay, once you are through with this, then you come to hypersonic missiles, and finally a subcategorization of hypersonic missiles is what exactly is a hypersonic glide vehicle. Now why exactly is this important? Because abhi jo long range hypersonic missile we are talking about, that is basically a hybrid. Okay, the long range hypersonic missile that we are talking about is basically a hybrid. Now what exactly is the hybrid here? It is not a complete hypersonic, I will write it HS, okay, hypersonic is HS, cruise missile, but at the same time it is not a complete hypersonic glide vehicle as well. Okay, now this particular technology or this particular missile has the distinction that it functions like a hypersonic glide vehicle, but at the same time it has the ability to change its path mid-flight. Okay, so during its flight it can change its path, which is actually a feature of the hypersonic cruise missiles. So in this particular manner we see there is a distinction with the technology that has been developed in India. Okay, so we are going to read about all of these in detail now. So first of all, let us talk about what exactly is a missile. So missile is basically a part of weaponry of any particular military force in the world. Okay, the objective of a missile is that it is a fast flowing, high damaging piece of equipment that is always launched to the adversarial side. Okay, so this particular piece of equipment is either guided. Guided basically means that you are already giving it instructions in the direction where it has to hit the target. For that matter, it is powered. Okay, it is powered using some engines, some rockets, so that it can you can say take up the flight, and subsequently it can very quickly go and destroy the enemy strongholds. Then at the same time, it's an airborne weapon, that is something which is projected into the air. You launch this on the air, you do not launch it over the ground. Okay, so this is something which is launched over the air. Now when you talk about how exactly does a missile you can say go to its target, so that is something which is based upon its guidance system. Okay, so that guidance system basically has got certain sensors. Okay, now these sensors are continuously trying to calculate the distance between the target and subsequently what is the you can say the current position of the missile, and based upon that it can relay the data to the ground centers, and then subsequently we can actually make or chart the you can say the entire flight path of this missile. So objective is to make the strike as accurate as possible. So that is why guidance system forms one of the most important aspects of any missile. Okay, so when we talk about what exactly are the major subcomponents of a missile, so the first thing that you will be needing is something to launch. Okay, so for launching what we have is called the engine or rocket. So this is basically going to give you the initial fuel, okay, when the rocket has to start. That is the first thing. The second thing that you will be needing is basically a fuel tank. Okay, you will be needing a fuel tank because without the fuel no engine can work. The third thing that you will be needing is basically a control and guidance system. Okay, that is the heart of accuracy. Okay, so this control and guidance system is basically going to be telling you what exactly is the kind of missile that we have. Do we have a missile that is guided? Do we have a missile that is ballistic? Okay, and then subsequently how does a missile strike its target? That is something which will come from here. Then apart from that, the next one would be the module for seeking or targeting. Okay, so seeking or targeting is going to first of all locate where you have the target. Okay, where do you have to get and detonate? Okay, so seeking is going to feed that data into the guidance system, and based upon that the guidance system is going to take the missile to its intended location. And finally the most important part would be the warhead. Now when you talk about warhead, so warhead is basically the final delivery mechanism, okay, which contains the weapon or the explosives that need to be delivered. So the payload basically is a part of this warhead. Okay, so payload is basically a part of this warhead. So we are going to understand all of these one by one. So based upon the control and guidance system, we basically have two types of missiles broadly classified. The first one is ballistic, the second one is cruise. Okay, so we are going to see what exactly are these two missiles. Okay, so first of all let us understand the broad components of a missile. Okay, so a missile will always have, we start the missile from the reverse direction. We are not starting from the top, we are starting from the bottom, because without this entire region you will never be able to launch a missile. So for launching a missile, the first thing that you are going to need is a very high velocity generating machine. Okay, that is something which is called as an engine. So when you talk about an engine, so engine basically has got multiple things. Okay, the engine will basically be having the entire heart of generating energy. So you basically are going to burn the fuel. That burning is basically called oxidation of the fuel. That is why you will be having a liquid oxygen tank. You will burn the fuel, and after burning the fuel a large amount of energy or thrust is generated. Okay, so when that thrust is generated, it is something which is pointed out from this particular nozzle. Okay, so that is why any kind of rocket or missile that you see on videos or telecast, you basically see a very bright ball of fire that actually follows the tail, that comes out from the tail. So that has such immense pressure from which it is coming out, such immense velocity with which it comes out, that it pushes this entire system ahead. Okay, so what is going to happen eventually, this entire tank which basically has got your fuel and oxidizer, it is going to completely you can say get emptied. So the fuel and the oxidizer will be consumed during the flight. So that is why this is something which is going to stop, or you can say limit the range of your you can say system or the missile. Then after that what you have is guidance and control. Now this guidance and control basically is you can say taking information from the seeker. Okay, that seeker could be installed at the tip, or for that matter that is something which has been already selected from the ground operation. So you basically have a target set, and once you have a target set, now you would need certain calculations, certain adjustments in the flight so that you hit the target accurately. So that is basically the guidance and control system. And then finally the top portion is basically what is called as the warhead, and inside the warhead what you have is basically called the payload. So payload is the explosive. This is the explosive. Okay, this is what is going to be detonated, and warhead is what carries this payload. Okay, so this is basically a general breakdown of a missile. Now today's missiles are way more advanced. Okay, so you will be finding many more components, but this is a general breakdown. You need not go even you can say deeper into this. Okay, that's more than enough. Now when we talk about the various kinds of missiles, so the most important kind of categorization that has been done based upon what path does the missile going to take. So based upon that, it is classified as ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. So when we talk about the ballistic missiles, okay, so when you are talking about the ballistic missile, so ballistic missiles basically have a very important part, that they are launched initially with engines or rockets. Okay, with engines or rockets. That's the first thing that we need to understand. And then secondly, what happens is that after the launch, the path is completely driven by gravity. Okay, that's the thing. So basically when you look at the ballistic missiles, now ballistic missiles basically have most of the flight unpowered. Most part of the flight is unpowered. You need to remember this. Okay, so this is something that we need to understand. Then at the same time what we need to understand is that it is driven purely by gravitation. Okay, so that is basically a ballistic missile. When we talk about a cruise missile, okay, when we talk about a cruise missile, so cruise missile is basically any missile that is driven by an engine. Okay, it is driven by an engine throughout the flight. So when it has an engine throughout the flight, what exactly happens? This is something which is going to have constant speed. It can maintain a constant speed throughout its flight. Okay, throughout its flight. Then subsequently what we need to understand is that this is something which will be used for high accuracy. Okay, high accuracy and maneuverability. Maneuverability basically means that you can change this particular flight path according to your own instructions. So it has got an engine which will continuously keep on changing the flight path just like a plane. So that is why this particular cruise missiles are usually the ones which have lower speeds. Okay, they have lower speeds. But when you talk about ballistic missiles, now they are the ones which can operate in high speeds. Okay, so that is basically the primary difference between the two. Okay, so I will write this. Ballistic missiles are basically the one which can operate at high speeds. Now the next thing that we need to know with respect to how a particular missile is launched. If the missile is launched from the surface, from the ground, and it is intended to hit a target on the ground, so this is basically a missile which is called as a surface to surface missile. Okay, so someone is launching the missile from the land and it is going to hit a target over the land. That is surface to surface missile. The second one is surface to air missile. So surface to air missile is basically the missile which is usually used in the air defense system. So you basically launch this missile from the ground, but it hits a target which is airborne, like an incoming drone, for that matter an incoming aircraft. That is what is a surface to air missile. So this is something that we have very you can say frequently seen when footages of you can say Operation Sindoor were the ones which were being telecasted. Okay. Then we have air to air missiles. So air to air missiles are actually mounted over fighter jets for the you can say deterring or fighting with the enemy aircrafts. So they basically are launched from an aerial platform and they hit a target in the you can say which is airborne. Then the next one is air to surface. Now these are basically the ones which have been utilized by the Israeli forces for you can say air raiding the Gaza Strip. So here the Israeli jets, or for that matter the jets, have actually flown in the sky and they release these particular missiles. These missiles then hit targets on the ground. Okay, so that is air to surface. Then we have anti-ship, anti-submarine and anti-tank. So these are three types of missiles which basically target an incoming ship from the adversary. So that is basically the one which is being launched from a ship or a submarine towards the ship to destroy it. An anti-submarine, which is basically you can say there to destroy an incoming enemy submarine, or for that matter an anti-tank missile, that is to destroy the enemy's incoming heavy artillery. Okay. And then we have submarine launched ballistic and cruise missiles. So these are basically the ones which are launched from the submarine. So they are launched from under the water, they come over the water, and after coming over the water they then get launched and subsequently hit their target. So these are the various classifications based upon the platform from which they get launched. Okay. So if I have to give you an example, surface to surface missile was the one which was used basically with BrahMos. If you remember, this is something which was highly telecast, that BrahMos missiles were used in the final days of the Operation Sindoor military confederation between India and Pakistan. So that was launched from the surface and it hit a surface on the Pakistani side. When you talk about surface to air missile system, any of the missiles that you have seen with respect to you can say the Operation Sindoor, that is all surface to air missile. You can be having the missile air defense system like Spider, Patriot. They basically, all of them are actually the ones which are surface to air. Now air to air missiles, example would be Akash. Okay, that would be an air to air missile. Air to surface missiles are plenty. Okay, you can be talking about the B-52 bombs. Okay, so B-52 bombs were basically the ones which were used by you can say B-52 planes were used for the bunker buster bombs. Okay, so bunker buster was basically the name of the missile that was launched by the US Air Force for destroying strategic nuclear enrichment sites of Iran. Okay, so that was basically called the bunker buster bombs and they were launched from B-52 aircrafts. Then anti-ship, anti-submarine and anti-tank there are several examples. Some of them are operational, some of them are not. And then we have submarine launched ballistic and cruise missiles. Many of them are not known by the name because they are heavily classified. But we will be reading about one of such submarine launched ballistic missiles later in this class. Okay. Then the next important categorization is based upon the distance that the flight flight can actually cover, the missile can actually cover. So when we talk about it, so with respect to the distance, it is first of all the ballistic missiles that are being talked about. Okay. So how far from the origin can this particular you can say missile go over ground? Okay, that is something which is called its range. Okay. So there are short range ballistic missiles which have a range of less than 1000 kilometers. Then there are medium range missiles which have the range of 1000 to 3000 kilometers. We have intermediate range ballistic missiles that have the range of 3000 to 5000 kilometers. And then we have intercontinental ballistic missiles which have a range, that is the ground to ground distance of more than 5500 kilometers. Okay. So in this particular manner we have various kinds of missiles, but the point is the farther a particular missile has to go, the more amount of fuel and the bigger that particular missile has to be. So it will be more costly. The shorter it has to go, the more smaller the missile would be, and at the same time more frequently you can launch that particular thing. So that is why all the armies or militaries in the world always want to maintain an optimal mix of short range, intermediate range and intercontinental ballistic missiles, including India. Okay. And subsequently the last categorization will be based upon speeds. So speeds are basically based upon subsonic, supersonic and hypersonic. So when we'll be reading about the speed of the missiles, we will be talking about it in detail. Okay, there are two more. The first one is tactical. So tactical missiles basically have a range of less than 300 kilometers. Usually they are surface to surface. Then there are strategic missiles. So strategic missiles are actually such missiles which actually deliver either nuclear payloads or nuclear weapons, or for that matter they are long range high energy explosives. Okay, so that is basically the strategic missiles which have longer range and they are nuclear capable, delivering nuclear warhead. So by the you can say classification of warhead, that is the weapons they carry, they could be conventional. So conventional are high energy explosives which actually go hit a target and make an enormous explosion. The greater the explosion, the greater would be the damage in the nearby locations. So that is conventional warhead. And then there are nuclear warheads. So nuclear warheads are basically the ones which deliver nuclear weapons like the nuclear fission or fusion bombs. Okay, so these are basically the classifications of missile. Now, when we talk about the missile, especially the ballistic missiles, because ballistic missiles are more commonly used and they basically have been used for a long period of time. Okay, in fact, when you talk about the Battle of Seringapatam, this was one of the occasions when the you can say such fired rockets which had iron tips at the top, they were basically used against the British. Okay, but the point is that when you talk about any ballistic system, it is predominantly based upon the gravitational interaction. So in order to understand that, we have actually taken the example of a ball. Okay, so basically what happens is that just like when you have to kick a ball, so the ball actually flies a certain distance in a parabolic fashion. So this kind of parabola is something that you see. Okay, and then subsequently what happens is that in this entire duration, the ball is completely under the influence of gravity. There is no external interaction with any kind of energy. Once you have kicked the ball flies away. Okay, now it is not having any other source of energy to keep going. So that is why it actually flies and it reaches a maximum point and then it comes down to the ground. Okay, so this is exactly how a ballistic missile also works. So what happens is that you will need an initial launch. Okay, so that is called the launching phase. Okay, so that is something where you are going to give some amount of acceleration. So this is basically where you launch. Okay, so once you launch, what happens is that the missile gets lifted up from the platform, and once it gets lifted up, so you basically try to power this missile all the way till it can attain a certain path that you want to achieve. Now subsequently what is going to happen is that once the launch is over and your missile has attained some amount of altitude, so altitude is basically the vertical distance from the ground. So this is altitude. Okay, so altitude is how high above the ground it is. Then subsequently what happens is that when you stop powering it, so now it is completely under the influence of gravity. So in this particular regard, what happens is that it reaches a maximum height. Okay, so this is something which is called as the maximum height, or for that matter, this is the maximum altitude. Okay, so from this particular point, now it starts its descent. Now the descent is completely under the influence of gravity. So now what is going to happen? Now it is going to hit its target, which is intended to be at this particular location. Okay, so that is basically how you see a ballistic missile functioning. So what do we understand from this? A ballistic missile, when you talk about a ballistic missile, so a ballistic missile will has a parabolic path, and because this is something which is extensively studied under physics, so it is very easy for many of the air defense systems to actually intercept this particular missile. Why? Because you just have to alter certain variables in order to understand from how far this particular you can say weapon has been launched, what you can say what kind of trajectory or path it is going to take, and subsequently how to intercept it. So this overall path, which is called parabolic path, is also called as its trajectory. So trajectory is whatever path you are going to take, and with respect to the trajectory, what happens is that you determine how to intercept this particular thing at a safe distance from the ground, so that you can minimize the amount of destruction that could be done from the exploding rubble. Okay, so this is basically what we need to understand. Now, in order to send this to a far off location, you basically have to change the angle of launch. So that is why in any of the photos that you see, which is of testing or maybe any of the launching that you see, that launch is always in an inclined fashion. It is never horizontal. It is very rarely it is vertical. Why? Because when it is launched horizontally, this horizontal distance is something that can enlarge. Okay, so the ground distance, the maximum distance over the ground that is covered between the origin and destination is what is called as range. Okay, so range is basically the horizontal distance from the point of origin to the target. That is the distance which is covered over the ground, which is called range, and the highest altitude that is achieved is the maximum altitude. Okay, so this is basically what is a projectile motion, or the motion which is there with the ballistic missile. Now what will be different is, with respect to a cruise missile, this parabolic trajectory will be completely destroyed. Why? Because now you have actually attached a rocket or an engine to power this missile. So now it is up to you. You would want to go it as high as possible, you want it to go as low as possible, and subsequently with cruise missiles the maneuverability is much more greater. So cruise missiles take a more time to intercept, but when you talk about ballistic missiles, they can be intercepted relatively easily. Okay, so that is basically the basic terms with respect to the ballistic missiles. Now, talking about the speed characterization of a missile, for that matter any object that is flying in the sky. So we basically have a particular number named after an Austrian physicist called Ernst Mach. Okay, that is Ernst Mach. Okay, so this particular scientist actually gave us a comparison of the speed between the ratio of the speed of the object and the speed of sound in that particular medium. So that is something which is called as the Mach number. So Mach number is basically the ratio of the speed of the object to the speed of sound in the medium where the object is traveling. So technically, when we talk about the missiles, for that matter aircrafts, they all are there, they are all flying in the sky. So when they are all flying in the sky, the medium of flying is actually air. So we basically take the speed of sound in air, and the object speed is basically the speed of this particular rocket, or for that matter missile. So what happens is that based upon this, the Mach number can be calculated. So what we have to understand is Mach number is a unitless or dimensionless quantity. Okay, this is a unitless or dimensionless quantity. So this basically means that it is a comparison of two speeds. That is why the units get cancelled out. So Mach number does not have a unit. Please remember this. Okay, and then subsequently what we have to understand is, based upon the ratio, we have three different ways in which we can characterize the Mach number. Okay, the first case. So I will first of all write down what exactly is the Mach number. So Mach number is in short written as MA. Okay, and it is basically the speed of object divided by speed of sound. Now there can be three cases with respect to the Mach number. Okay, speed of sound. Okay, speed of sound can be less than speed of object. That's the first case. The second case can be it is greater than the speed of object. The third case can be they are equal. Okay, so when the speed of sound is less than the speed of object and when it is greater than the speed of object. So these are two of the most important considerations, but let us start from here. Okay, from the bottom. When the speed of sound is equal, speed of sound is equal to the speed of object. Okay, this is something which is called as sonic. Okay, this is something which is called as sonic. So in this particular case, the Mach number would be 1. Now when the speed of sound is less than the speed of object, so this basically means that the Mach number will be greater than 1 because this is smaller than the first one. In such situations, you basically call this particular thing as supersonic or hypersonic. We will characterize this as well, don't worry. Okay. And then finally, when the speed of sound is greater than the speed of object. Okay. So this is greater and this is smaller. So in this particular scenario, it is basically called that the Mach number is less than 1, and this is something which is called as subsonic. Okay. So what we are concerned about with respect to missiles are actually these speeds, when the speed of object is greater than the speed of sound. Okay. Now talking about supersonic and hypersonic. So when we talk about supersonic speeds, okay, so here the speed of object is 1 to 5 times the speed of sound. Okay, this is the supersonic speed. But when you talk about hypersonic speeds, now this is the speed of object is greater than 5 times the speed of sound. Okay, so that is basically hypersonic speeds. So this is something which is exceptionally fast, okay. And supersonic is something that has been attained not just by the fighter pilots, but at the same time supersonic speeds have been actually attained with respect to you can say the missiles as well. The example would be BrahMos. Okay, so BrahMos missile is basically one such missile which has been one of the first supersonic missiles to be inducted into active military service, and till date remains one of the most deadly kind of supersonic missiles that are present. Then when you talk about hypersonic, now this is the one which is currently under development by a lot of different countries including India. But as a fact, I would want to tell you here that the first human to fly at hypersonic speeds, so this is something which has already been done. Okay, so do not mistake that this is not this has never been achieved. Okay, the first human to fly at hypersonic speed, you will be shocked to know, but this human was Yuri Gagarin, the first human to go to space from the Soviet Union. So when he was there on his first flight, at that particular time in that orbital flight, he basically attained speed which was hypersonic. So he was the first human to fly at this particular speed. So do not confuse this with the Top Gun, that is the first way that we are going hypersonic. Okay, so that's the thing. Now what you are seeing is basically a sonic boom. What is the sonic boom? This kind of cloud that you are seeing from which this jet is actually emerging. So what happens is that when a particular fighter jet, or for that matter a missile, actually transitions from subsonic speed to supersonic speed. So technically what is happening is that the flight is you can say the flight is actually increasing its speed. On this side the speed was less than the speed of sound, and after this cloud the speed has become more than the speed of sound. So that is something which sends shock into the air, and that is something which is called as sonic boom. So this is basically what happens to the air around this entire plane. So what is happening, that because the plane is accelerating so rapidly that a shock wave is actually generated, which is called as the sonic boom. So this is done whenever any jet attains supersonic speeds. Okay, so when we talk about the way in which we are going to go from sonic to supersonic to hypersonic, so we have to realize one thing, that when we talk about a vehicle, Okay, let us say that you basically have a vehicle and you want to go from point A to point B. So in this particular regard, what happens? You are going to your vehicle, switching on the vehicle, and then you start moving towards your destination. Now depending upon the traffic, you may accelerate or decelerate. Now let us assume that you got a lucky day, that the roads are completely empty and the roads are good, they do not have a lot of potholes. So what is going to happen? When you start from your home, you start the vehicle from zero. Okay, you start the vehicle from zero, you start gradually accelerating it, you move some distance away from your home, and then you start doing your showboating skills, because you do not want you to be grounded from the family. So you go to some distance and then you start accelerating. So when you start accelerating, what happens? Your speed increases. Okay, so what happens is that we have to understand that any missile, that may be sonic or hypersonic, will have to start from the rest or from zero. So that is why you will need engines. Okay, you will need engines. What kind of engines? The one which launch you. Okay, which take the launch, meaning from rest to some velocity, near the velocity of sound or near the speed of sound. Okay, so you will need this engine first of all. Okay, now this is something which is achieved by rockets or booster motors. Okay, so this is basically done by rockets or booster motors. Now these are the same booster motors that you see attached to any of the space launch vehicles, just like PSLV. So PSLV is always, you can say, arranged with certain other smaller rockets. They are basically the ones which give the initial thrust at a greater rate. So then what happens is that you basically attain a velocity. Okay, so first of all is launch. After you have launched, now what you are going to do is that you have to transition. So this is going to take you to the speed of sound. Okay, so it can take you from subsonic to sonic speeds. Okay, so you have now attained the speed of sound. Now what is going to happen? Now you want to accelerate. Okay, now you want to go supersonic. So the second thing would be accelerating from sonic to supersonic. Now this is something which is attained by something called a ramjet engine. Okay, this is specifically called a ramjet engine. So now what has happened? You have actually become supersonic. After this, what you have to do? Now you have to transition from supersonic. Now the third would be from supersonic to hypersonic. Okay, so you need to increase your speed even further. Now this is something which is achieved by another engine which is called as a scramjet engine. Okay, so you have to understand one thing here. The first thing to power on with respect to any hypersonic or supersonic vehicle would always be the rockets and motors. Once you have attained the speeds of sonic, or you are in the transonic zone, then what happens is that now you can initiate or you can ignite the ramjet engine, and finally when you have reached the you can say the speed near 5 times of sound, then you switch on your scramjet engine. So this basically tells you that any hypersonic vehicle will need to have several stages of engines. Okay, and in this manner we are going to attain the speeds from 0 to hypersonic. Okay, so this is the engineering problem that is there. Now the second engineering problem that comes up is that when you are actually speeding yourself at hypersonic speeds, so the air resistance is immensely great. Now that actually raises the temperature so definitely that it becomes very difficult to maintain stable communication, and when there is no stable communication, the precision or the guidance system may falter. So that is the second problem that needs to be figured out, and this is exactly where most of the countries are actually struggling, because unless you have a stable guidance system, you will not be able to hit targets, and subsequently if the target hits a wrong location, it can be devastating. Okay, so that's the thing. So now let us talk about this question. Now you have discussed a lot about the missiles. Now let us solve this particular question. So read this question carefully and answer this by pausing the video and comment this. Okay, I am going to start this. You may pause the video now. So this question is, consider the following statements about hypersonic missiles. A missile operating at a speed of greater than Mach 3.5 is called a hypersonic missile. These missiles use ramjet engines to attain hypersonic speed. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? So we have just seen that with respect to any particular missile to be called as a hypersonic missile, we will need to have a speed of greater than Mach 5. Okay, so 5.0 and more, that is something which should be achieved by you. Okay, so this is wrong. The second one, these missiles use ramjet engines to attain hypersonic speeds. You have just seen that ramjet engines are used for supersonic speeds. For hypersonic speeds, you will need scramjet engines. So even this is wrong. Okay, so the correct answer to this is that both the statements are wrong. So the correct answer here would be option D, neither 1 nor 2. Okay, now when we talk about hypersonic missiles now, so what we have to now come with respect to the various concepts developed, that hypersonic missiles, when we talk about hypersonic missiles, they should be having speeds greater than Mach 5. Speed should be greater than Mach number should be greater than 5. Okay, that is the first thing. So this is written as, in short, it is written as MA5 or 5MA, whatever you want to write. The second thing is basically that you should be flying at an altitude of 90 kilometers or below that. But now this is something which is a highly subjective thing. Many militaries consider this as the hypersonic missile, but this is something which is not always true. Okay, and then subsequently this would be a missile that can deliver any kind of weapon. Okay, so the warhead could be conventional or strategic. So I hope you have been paying attention, and I do not have to actually tell you what exactly is a conventional or a strategic warhead, but still I will write down nuclear here so that you do not have any confusion. So this is the basic about hypersonic missiles that we need to understand. Now we need to go to a second categorization, and that is called hypersonic glide vehicles. Okay, so that is hypersonic glide vehicles, abbreviated as HGV. Now hypersonic glide vehicles are actually the ballistic equivalents, or these are ballistic missiles that achieve hypersonic speeds, during their descent. Okay, when they are actually coming down to hit the target. So at that particular time, the kind of you can say speed that is attained is hypersonic. So these particular glide vehicles are actually launched high into the atmosphere. Okay, so when you talk about high into the atmosphere, it basically means that this is something which is actually utilizing the low Earth orbit. Okay, the low Earth orbit, that is basically at an altitude of less than 2000 kilometers, and from there what happens is that we have to power it till here, that it reaches the higher end of the atmosphere, that is at low Earth orbit. Why? Because in this particular location you have minimal amount of air resistance. So now what is going to happen is that once you have been launched here, till that particular time you have to supply fuel, you have to use engines, and then subsequently what is going to happen from this particular point, which is then going to be the highest point, from here what happens is that you start the seeking operation. Seeking basically means the targeting operation where you want to target this, and subsequently now when it is going to descend, so acceleration due to gravity or gravitational assistance is something which is going to accelerate this particular you can say missile at hypersonic speeds towards the ground. So that is basically a hypersonic glide vehicle. So when it is coming down as a gliding you can say jet, it is something which is coming down at a hypersonic speed. Okay, so now talking about hypersonic glide vehicle. It is a warhead for cruise missiles enabling flight at hypersonic speed. The second one, the mid-flight maneuverability of these vehicles make their interception very difficult. India has recently successfully tested its first hypersonic glide vehicle. How many of the above statements is or are correct? So first one, it is a warhead for cruise missiles enabling flight at hypersonic speed. This is wrong. Hypersonic glide vehicle is a mechanism of its own. Okay, so this is basically not a warhead. It is a way in which a flight in which a missile is designed. That is wrong. Mid-flight maneuverability of these vehicles make their interception very difficult. This is true. Now with the advanced guidance systems that have come up, we can actually maneuver these flights in the during their mid-flight. Okay, so when they are actually in their descent, we can actually change their course. So that is what makes them very difficult to be first of all detected and second to be intercepted, because when you are intercepting, you are actually seeking the target of this missile. But the point is, if you basically change the course of the missile, so the interceptor is going to miss. So that is the thing. And India has recently successfully test fired its hypersonic glide vehicle. That is basically the long range missile that we are talking about. Now it is partly a hypersonic glide vehicle, partly it is a cruise missile because of its maneuverability that can be attained mid-flight. So the correct answer here would be that only two of the statements are correct. Okay, the first one is wrong. Okay, now the next one, consider the following statements. The range of a missile is the maximum in-flight altitude attained by it. Missiles with a range of more than 5500 kilometers are called intercontinental ballistic missiles. Okay, which of the statements above is or are correct? So we have just discussed that range is basically the maximum horizontal distance. Okay, maximum horizontal distance that can be covered by a missile. That's the thing that we have to understand. Okay, so that is why range is not about its mid-flight altitude. It is wrong. Next, missiles with a range of more than 5500 kilometers are called intercontinental ballistic missile. This is true. This statement is correct. So the correct answer here, which of the above statements is or are correct? Only the second statement is correct. Option B is the right answer. Okay, so that's the question. Now consider the following. Now this is basically a current affairs based question. So if you know this, please answer this, or I'll tell you the answer right now. Consider the following: Avangard, DFZF, Fatah 2 and Zircon. Which of the above are hypersonic missiles? Okay, so when you talk about Avangard, this is basically a hypersonic missile of Russia. Okay, DFZF is basically a hypersonic missile of China. Fatah 2 has been in news because it was deployed by you can say Iran towards Israel. It's also a hypersonic missile, but it is owned by Iran. And Zircon is again a hypersonic missile owned by Russia. So the two confrontations that we are seeing right now, first one is the Russia-Ukraine confrontation. There has been the first use of hypersonic missiles, and second, it was Iran who launched it on Israel. Okay, so all the four are actually hypersonic missiles. They are the name of hypersonic missiles, and subsequently the correct answer here would be all of the above. All of them are hypersonic missiles. Okay, so this was basically the question with respect to you can say the hypersonic missiles. But one question has already come from hypersonic missiles with respect to UPSC 2022. Okay, so this was the question in UPSC 2022. Pause and try to solve this question. I will be reading along right now, so you can pause your video now. The question says, which one of the following statement best reflects the idea behind the fractional orbital bombardment system often talked about in the media? Okay, and the options are: a hypersonic missile launched into the space to encounter the asteroid approaching the Earth and explode it in space. A spacecraft that lands on another planet after making several orbital motions. A missile is put into a stable orbit around the Earth and deorbits over a target on the Earth. A spacecraft moves along a comet with same speed and places a probe on its surface. Okay, so these were the 4 options that were given, and the technology that is being talked about is fractional orbital bombardment system. Okay, so let us first of all understand what is fractional orbital bombardment system with a diagram. So what is done is that a hypersonic missile is actually placed in the low Earth orbit. Okay, so a hypersonic missile will be, it is placed on or in the low Earth orbit. Okay, so that is called LEO. Now what happens is that when it is placed on the low Earth orbit, it is orbiting the Earth, okay, without any kind of threat. Now once it acquires a target, it deorbits. Okay, meaning it leaves its orbit, and once it leaves its orbit, it then glides at hypersonic speeds. Towards the target. This is basically what is the fractional orbital bombardment system. So what happens is that if you actually have to use a ballistic missile, so what happens is this target, the target that you are trying to hit, this will have its own radar. So when it has its own radar, that radar will basically have this kind of you can say range, that it can actually intercept this particular missile when it is already crossing this point. Okay, so when your ballistic missile is crossing that point, the radar of the target is going to detect it, that okay, a ballistic missile is coming towards me from this particular location, and it will subsequently intercept you somewhere here. Now what happens in fractional orbital bombardment system is that you are comfortably doing the round around the Earth. Okay, and once this target is actually acquired, now basically there are 2 ways in which you can attack it. You first of all deorbit. Okay, you deorbit and then you take this particular path. So when you are taking this particular path, so you basically are at a much lower distance than the ballistic missiles from the target. The height is much lower, and the other advantage is you are already at hypersonic speed, so your interception is almost impossible. Okay, the second way, that you can basically deorbit from this location, which is beyond the radar limit of the enemy target, and subsequently you can guide completely undetected. So this is something which is called as the fractional orbital bombardment system. So the correct answer to this question would be a missile that is put into a stable orbit around the Earth, okay, and deorbits over a target on the Earth. This is basically a question that came up in UPSC 2022. Okay, so this is basically what we have with respect to the you can say the HOBS. Okay, now the Integrated Missile Development Program of India, that was launched in 1983, it gave us a series of various you can say missiles. Now this was something which was led by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, and for that reason he is called the Missile Man of India. Okay, so Integrated Guided Missile Development Program has given us a range of these missiles, just like the Prithvi, Akash, Nag, Trishul and Agni. Okay, these are basically all those missiles which have actually been you can say developed for various ranges and various platforms. Okay, so when we will be dealing about this in detail with respect to our science and technology classes, we will be talking about it in detail. Okay, now going to a second class of missile that has been launched recently, and that is called the K4 missile. Okay, so when we talk about this particular K4 missile, so K4 missile is a submarine launched ballistic missile, SLBM, that has been recently again test fired by the Indian Navy. So Indian Navy test fired this particular ballistic missile from one of its you can say nuclear powered submarine called the INS Arighat. So INS Arighat basically belongs to the Arihant family of submarines, which are indigenously developed nuclear powered submarines to secure India's ocean interests. Okay, so this particular missile is an intermediate range ballistic missile. So if it is an intermediate range ballistic missile, the range of this particular missile has to be less than 5500 kilometers. So that is why the range of this missile is 3500 kilometers. And this particular missile is has been enabled to deliver nuclear warheads. So that is why with this particular successful launch, now India has the ability to deploy a nuclear weapon from land, air as well as from sea. So that is basically operationalizing the nuclear triad and at the same time capable of delivering a second strike when needed. Okay, so India basically has a concept of no first use, that India will never be the first country to fire a nuclear weapon on any other country. That is basically the first principle of our nuclear doctrine. But at the same time, we reserve the right to retaliate as a you can say in the second time. So that is why when we are going to retaliate, this particular submarine could be used to launch the you can say the attack. Okay, so that is basically the whole concept here. So what do you want to read here? You want to read about the ballistic missile. Then at the same time you would want to read about the different types of ballistic missiles, that is cruise missile, subsonic and sonic missiles. And then what are the various ballistic missiles in the Indian arsenal. So you have just seen that particular photo where we have a lot of different ballistic missiles. Okay, so this is basically the launch of that particular vehicle. This is the Kalam series of missiles, or the K4 missile that has been developed for INS Arihant and INS Arighat. Okay, so this particular missile has been developed as a naval version. It is the naval version of Shaurya missile system, which is again a hypersonic missile system. So K4 missile system is actually launched for this particular purpose. Now this can be launched from under the water. It will come over the surface, it will break the surface till some extent, and after that this motor that you are seeing, this is something which is actually helping it come out of the water. Okay, so once it comes out of the water, it enables it to fly to a certain altitude, and once it flies to that particular altitude, it detaches itself, and once it detaches itself, this is the warhead that you are seeing, and then the ignition starts. So this is basically the ignition that is going on. And then subsequently, after it has reached sufficient altitude, this part is going to detach. This part will detach, and ultimately this warhead is the only thing that is going to go to the enemy location. So that is basically how a submarine launched ballistic missile looks like, and this is basically the test fire of the submarine launch that was done by India. Now, because we have read everything, now directly let us jump into the question. So ballistic missiles, consider the following statements about the missiles. Ballistic missiles are missiles running on an engine that powers throughout its trajectory. A cruise missile is initially powered by rockets and it flies under the influence of gravity over most part of its trajectory. A cruise missile cannot be accelerated to supersonic or hypersonic speeds. Which of the statements above is or are correct? So the first thing that we know about a ballistic missile is that this particular missile is having only an initial launch. Okay, that in the initial phase of the flight you are going to give it some amount of energy, you are going to give it some amount of propulsion. Once it has attained sufficient altitude, the propulsion gets off, and then the missile actually flies under the influence of gravity. So major part of the flight is not powered, it is something which is completely under the influence of gravity. So the statement is wrong that ballistic missiles are missiles running on an engine that powers throughout its journey. No, they do not have an engine that powers its journey throughout. Okay, then a cruise missile is initially powered by rockets and it flies under the influence of gravity over most part of its trajectory. This is also wrong. We have just seen that a cruise missile is basically the one which has its engine intact. It is there throughout the journey, it ensures constant speed, it ensures maneuverability, and subsequently that is the one which is a powered flight throughout. So definitely the cruise missiles is basically going to be more expensive than the ballistic missiles. This is also wrong. The third one, a cruise missile cannot be accelerated to supersonic or hypersonic speeds. It can be. Okay, it can be accelerated to supersonic or hypersonic speeds. You need the right engines to do that. So the correct answer of this is that none of the statements given above are correct. So option D is basically the correct answer. Okay. Then consider the following statements. The Arihant class submarines are a group of indigenously built nuclear powered ballistic missile submarine. Okay. These submarines are capable of delivering strategic payloads to the adversary. INS Arhant was the first ballistic missile submarine to be built by a country other than P5 countries. How many of the above statements is or are correct? So I have just told you that Arihant class submarines are indigenously built nuclear powered submarines, and these submarines have been built to launch such ballistic missiles to the adversary territory. So the first statement is correct. Now these submarines are capable of delivering strategic payloads back to the payloads to the adversary. So now this is basically about the terminology, that strategic payloads here talks about nuclear you can say payload. So this is something which can be given, that is true. Now the third one is basically a fact that INS Arihant has been the first submarine that has been developed by a country which is not a part of the P5 countries or the countries which are the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. So this is also correct. So the correct answer to this question is that all of the above statements, that is only 3, are correct in this particular case. Okay. So this is basically all about the you can say the INS Arihant. Now UPSC also asked another question in 2025 with respect to the missile technology. Now this question was, what is the common characteristic of chemical substances generally known as Cl20, HMX and LLM-105, which are sometimes talked about in the media? Okay, the options are, these are alternatives to hydrofluorocarbon refrigerants, these are explosives in military weapons, these are high energy fuels for cruise missiles, these are propulsion fuels for rockets. Okay, so when you talk about these 3 things, Cl20, HMX and LLM-105, I'll just give you the full forms. So when you talk about Cl20, okay, this is basically China Lake, that is basically one of the facilities at the USA for making some of the high energy explosives. So China Lake 20, this is something which is also called as nitramine. Okay, this is the most powerful non-nuclear explosive known to humans. Okay, this is basically the case. Now this is one of the major ingredients of Indian missiles. Okay, when you talk about HMX, HMX is high melting explosives. Okay, high melting explosive. This is also a explosive that is used in weapons and missiles, and LLM-105 is also one such compound. Okay, the point is that making Cl20 is extremely expensive. It is costing 70,000 rupees a kilo. When you talk about high melting explosives, that costs about 6,000 rupees a kilo. Okay, and the point is that Cl20 had been indigenously developed by India for the first time in 2010. Okay, so what do we understand from all these things? We understand that these are basically explosives which are used in military weapons. So these are basically the high energy explosives that we are talking about, which are intended to harm the enemies. Okay, so this was the answer of the UPSC 2025 question. So I hope this particular discussion helped you understand what exactly are the important terms with respect to the missiles and missile technology. We will be taking up a detailed discussion on missiles when you do science and technology, and at the same time I would also want you to remind that this particular initiative would be a free initiative which will cover 16 months of current affairs, and we would really want you to be in action when we are actually doing this particular initiative. So please like, share, subscribe and also comment so that we can understand what exactly are your needs, and subsequently we will be suitably modifying our way of operating this. Okay, so till then, see you next time, take care, and if you have any doubt please do comment. Thank you.